I think it's a surprise to some extent that people were expecting a lot of demonstration, people were expecting social unrest to some extent at the pension reform, but the fact that the movement seems to be growing even after the law has been passed, I think it's something that was not that expected. So on the one hand, it's very difficult for Macron to simply decide to cancel the reform. He's been elected once. He's been re-elected again on the idea of having a pension reform. If he simply gives up, I don't think it's a very healthy sign, even for democracy in itself. But then there is, I think, quite a big scope for him to sit down with unions and try to think about the main problems of the current reform, which is that it seems to be very unfair to a lot of people because it is treating badly people who are starting to work early, women who had career interrupted. And for that, I think he will try to get a path of making some improvement on the labor market, trying to compensate people who lose from the reform. The question is, will it be enough? I think once the cycle of demonstration and then violence, there's been a lot of violence, both from demonstrators but also from police. I think when this cycle is started, we've seen it with the Yellow Jacket, it's very difficult to stop. Yellow Jacket ended up because of COVID. So I don't know how this one will end up.
Renaud, you're making the point as to whether the protesters start to turn against each other and become unpopular because of the level of violence and the disruption. If we just think our way through this, we've had some in Paris, Parisians dining while there's been effectively burning bins next to them. But at this point, there has been a bulk of support against the pension reform. So is this different this time round where we don't see the protesters simply turning against each other?
Up to now, I think when the question is, do you agree with the idea of the pension as it is, I think there is a very strong majority against it. But indeed, I think as much as people despise, I mean, a lot of people despise the reform, people will want at some point to go back to the ordinary life. And I think somehow Macron is banking a bit on possible fatigue if the demonstrations continue. And also, there is a lot more on the agenda. So the topics will change a lot. You've seen there was no violence in Paris this weekend during the pension demonstration, but there were other big demonstrations in the countryside against environmental projects. Somebody is still in between life and death for that. There will be other projects of law on migration that will also be very popular in some circles, very unpopular in others. So there might be a change of conversation, there might be other oppositions, and the hope that it all fades away. I'm not that convinced it will happen, but somehow when you talk about people wanting to come back to their ordinary life, at some point we're all humans and people might be tired of violence.
Let me ask you a slightly different question, and it's the one about democracy here, because the mechanism that was used to push this change through has, it seems, also stirred up anger in France. Do you think that there is a shift of focus in the protesting now, not just from the issue of the additional 2 years to retirement, but the fact that Macron used anti-democratic means to achieve the legislation?
So the way the legislation went through is a mechanism that is actually very frequent in French democracy. It's been the 100th time it's been used in the Fifth Republic. It is simply tying the votes of the law to the confidence in the government. What makes it very different this time is that you don't have a majority against an opposition. You have France, which is now divided in 3 equal parts. 1/3 on the left, far left, 1/3 on the right, far right, and Macron in the middle. But because of the way the French institutions work, Macron is still governing alone, despite not having a majority in parliament, and nobody is used to build coalition with him, and he's not used to build coalition with anyone. So he has to somehow rule as a majority, because he really tried. On this pension reform, he cut and paste the project of pension of the right-wing Les Républicains. He offered them to vote for it, but at the end, they were not ready to vote for something unpopular. So he went through this procedure of tying the vote to the confidence in the government. It went through. It is 100% democratic within the French system. But the question is the current French political structure really adapted to a society that is not divided into majority opposition, but that is more subtle, as more subtle groups, and would need to start at some point to learn to work together, to build coalition. And at the moment, of course, it doesn't look like it's a big success.